Hi, I'm John Atack, and this is a reading for Lyrical Wax. As you can see from our piece on Richard Brautigan, I am a tremendous Richard Brautigan fan. I first read his first novel, Confederate General from Big Sur, when I was 18. A friend gave it to me and said, "I think this is weird, you'll probably like it." And I've stayed with it all my life since then. I bought this collection here, this very volume, when I was 20, or thereabouts. I think I was actually probably 1975, before my 20th birthday. And I've read and reread it. That's one of 2 volumes of short stories by Brautigan, which I think are the pinnacle of his work. His poetry is very good. His novels are great. But this is The Revenge of the Lawn. And the title story is wonderful, but a little long for today's purposes. He also wrote a collection called the Tokyo Montana Express. I think he is the great poet and author of the hippie era, though I'm not sure he would have identified as a hippie himself. He was in San Francisco in the early 60s when Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters were doing what they were doing. And they were using the term hippie, which they, of course, rejected. In February 1967, they held a festival called the Death of Hippie, 4 months before the Summer of Love launched the hippie movement through the media onto the world. So I'm going to read 2 stories, wonderful stories by Richard Brautigan. The first is called The Weather in San Francisco. It was a cloudy afternoon, with an Italian butcher selling a pound of meat to a very old woman. But who knows what such an old woman could possibly use a pound of meat for? She was too old for that much meat. Perhaps she used it for a beehive, and she had 500 golden bees at home waiting for the meat, their bodies stuffed with honey. "What kind of meat would you like today?" the butcher said. "We have some good hamburger. It's lean." "I don't know," she said. "Hamburger is something else." "Yeah, it's lean. I ground it myself. I put a lot of lean meat in it." "Hamburger doesn't sound right," she said. "Yeah," the butcher said. "It's a good day for hamburger. Look outside, it's cloudy. Some of those clouds have rain in them." "I'll get the hamburger," he said. "No," she said. "I don't want any hamburger, and I don't think it's going to rain. I think the sun's going to come out, and it'll be a beautiful day, and I want a pound of liver." The butcher was stunned. He did not like to sell liver to old ladies. There was something about it that made him very nervous. He didn't want to talk to her anymore. He reluctantly sliced a pound of liver off a huge red chunk and wrapped it up in white paper and put it into a brown bag. It was a very unpleasant experience for him. He took her money, gave her the change, and went back to the poultry section to try and get a hold on his nerves. By using her bones, like the sails of a ship, the old woman passed outside into the street. She carried the liver, as if it were a victory, to the bottom of a very steep hill. She climbed the hill, and being very old, it was hard on her. She grew tired and had to stop and rest many times before she reached the top. At the top of the hill was the old woman's house, a tall San Francisco house with bay windows that reflected a cloudy day. She opened her purse, which was like a small autumn field, and near the fallen branches of an old apple tree she found her keys. Then she opened the door. It was a dear and trusted friend. She nodded at the door and went into the house and walked down a long hall into a room that was filled with bees. There were bees everywhere in the room. Bees on the chairs, bees on the photograph of her dead parents, bees on the curtains, bees on an ancient radio that had once listened to the 1930s, bees on her comb and brush. The bees came to her and gathered about her lovingly, while she unwrapped the liver and placed it upon a cloudy silver platter that soon changed into a sunny day. And we'll follow that, as we must, with actually the next story in the volume, which I've thought about quite a lot recently. It just seems to be, I've read these stories so much. When I first went to Los Angeles, which was in 1986, it was astonishing because everywhere I go there were little references, or up to the Bay, there were little references to songs and stories and things from my teens and 20s. And, so I went to Malibu and thought about Joni Mitchell breaking like the waves at Malibu. And I went up to Observatory Crest and thought about Captain Beefheart going to Observatory Crest. And I looked out over the valley and thought about John Mayall saying it must have been the same as when Apaches roamed the land. But when I went up to the Bay, it was Richard Brautigan everywhere. Complicated banking problems, however. Whenever anything gets difficult, I think about this story and how incredibly true it is. Complicated banking problems. I have a bank account because I grew tired of burying my money in the backyard, and something else happened. I was burying some money a few years ago when I came across a human skeleton. The skeleton had the remains of a shovel in one hand and a half-dissolved coffee can in the other hand. The coffee can was filled with a kind of rust dust material that I think was once money. So now I have a bank account. But most of the time, that doesn't work out very well either. When I wait in line, there are almost always people in front of me who have complicated banking problems. I have to stand there and endure the financial cartoon crucifixion of America. It goes something like this. There are 3 people in front of me. I have a little cheque to cash. My banking will only take a minute. The cheque is already endorsed. I have it in my hand, pointed in the direction of the teller. The person just being waited on now is a woman, 50 years old. She is wearing a long black coat, though it's a hot day. She appears to be very comfortable in the coat, and there is a strange smell coming from her. I think about it for a few seconds and realise that this is the first sign of a complicated banking problem. And she reaches into the folds of her coat and removes the shadow of a refrigerator filled with sour milk and year-old carrots. She wants to put the shadow in her savings account. She's already made out the slip. I look up at the ceiling and pretend that it's the Sistine Chapel. The old woman puts up quite a struggle before she's taken away. There's a lot of blood on the floor. She bit an ear off one of the guards. I guess you have to admire her spunk. The cheque in my hand is for $10. The next 2 people in line are actually one person. They are a pair of Siamese twins, but they each have their own bank books. One of them is putting $82 in his savings account, and the other one is closing his savings account. The teller counts out $3,574 for him, and he puts it away in the pocket on his side of the pants. All this takes time. I look up at the ceiling of the bank again, but I cannot pretend that it is the Sistine Chapel any more. My cheque is sweaty, as if it had been written in 1929. The last person between me and the teller is totally anonymous looking. He is so anonymous that he's barely there. He puts 237 cheques down on the counter that he wants to deposit in his current account. They are for a total of $489,000. He also has 611 cheques that he wants to deposit in his savings account. They are for a total of $1,754,961. His cheques completely cover the counter, like a success snowstorm. The teller starts on his banking. as if she were a long-distance runner, while I stand there thinking that the skeleton in the backyard had made the right decision after all. And one last Richard Brautigan story. I was in Montreal in 1988, and I was meant to recording what's called a teaser for what was meant to be a documentary that would come from my book, Sell These People, A Piece of Blue Sky. And things didn't actually work out at that point. But I was there for 3 days, and the producer, the wonderful Ron Lee, was a quite remarkable man, the head of the Romany Council in Canada, and author of Goddamn Gypsy, and he made models of medieval and Renaissance ships, scale models for museums. He'd worked at the National Enquirer for 10 years. I mean, he was great fun. And he went to school with Leonard Cohen. And he said, as we were driving from the airport, and I'd been warned by Ben Corridan that Ron Lee was probably going to kill me. It's a long drive in the deep of night from Montreal airport into Montreal. I wasn't sure I was in the right place because the pilot had said we were landing at Montreal. So it was all very confusing. And as we were driving, he said, I heard the song Suzanne by Leonard Cohen. I said, yes, indeed I had. He said, well, tomorrow you'll meet her because she's my assistant. And when I got to meet her, we spent 3 days together working on this thing. And we sat in a Russian restaurant in Montreal, call it what you will. And I mentioned Richard Brautigan. He said, oh, I met him. I went down to San Francisco in about 1968, I think it was, and spent an evening with him. So there's my, 1 degree of separation from Richard Brautigan. And this has been Lyrical Wax. I'm John Atack, and you have my gratitude for your time. And please get your friends to watch this, because we need more Richard Brautigan in the world. We really do. Thank you very much.